Let's dive into a story that's really two stories in one. It's about cold, hard military strategy on one side and these legendary, almost mythical one-on-one battles on the other. It's all about one king who had to conquer both fortified cities and literal giants.
So think about it for a second. Which is the bigger challenge? A massive city with high walls and an army of defenders, or a single towering giant with, get this, 24 fingers and toes? In the story of King David's rise, we actually get to see both, and how these challenges are met tells us a whole lot about how legends get made.
You know, in the ancient world, even war had its seasons, and for a king, there was a right time to march. Our story kicks off right in that sweet spot, the spring. It's when the snow melts, the ground hardens, and armies can finally move.
So spring rolls around, the season when kings are supposed to lead their armies into battle. But King David? He sends his number one general, Joab, to do all the heavy lifting. The army marches off to conquer the Ammonites, while the king himself just stays home, comfortable in his palace in Jerusalem. Kind of strange for a warrior king, right? And it really sets the stage for everything that follows.
Now, the first big enemy on the list isn't some mythical beast. It's a city. And to take down a fortified city, you need a different kind of monster altogether. The cold, calculating, brutal machine of an ancient army laying siege.
And this was warfare by the numbers. It was a pretty grim playbook. Step 1. You starve them out. Joab's army just torches the countryside, cutting off all supplies. Step 2. You trap them. They surround the capital, Rabbah, and turn it into a cage. Only then, once they're weakened, do you launch the final assault. And after that, the spoils of war.
The strategy, as brutal as it was, worked perfectly. Joab and his army completely crush Rabbah, leaving it in ruins. And only then, after all the hard, dirty work is done and the smoke is clearing, guess who finally decides to show up? King David himself. He arrives just in time to take a victory lap and claim all the credit.
So, what were these spoils he was so eager to claim? Well, let's start with a single number. 75 pounds. That's 34 kilograms. Just let that sink in for a second. What on earth in a ruined city could possibly weigh that much?
That 75 pounds, that was the weight of a single crown, a talent of pure gold studded with precious gems taken right off the head of the defeated king. When David put that on his own head, it was way more than just treasure. It was the ultimate symbol that he hadn't just won a battle. He now owned the entire kingdom.
But for the Ammonites, this victory was, well, it was total devastation. David's army stripped the city of absolutely everything of value. And the people who survived the siege, they were rounded up and forced into slavery. This wasn't a one-off either. The same brutal blueprint was used on all the Ammonite towns, systematically crushing an entire nation.
And right when you think you know what the story is about, sieges, strategy, the grim reality of war, the whole thing just pivots hard. The enemy is no longer a city you can surround. It's a completely different kind of foe. Now we're talking about a war with the Philistines that isn't fought by armies, but by individual champions facing off against living legends.
And these new enemies, they come from a seriously intimidating bloodline, the Rephaites. These weren't just big guys. They were a legendary race of giants. The stories said they were descended from ancient titans, and they were known throughout the land for their terrifying size and strength. And these are the guys David's men have to face now. So another war with the Philistines breaks out, but this time the storyteller does something really interesting. The narrative completely ignores the big armies and the battle plans. It zooms all the way in on single combat. This isn't a war of armies anymore, it's a war of champions.
What we get next is basically a highlight reel of legendary showdowns. David's best warriors step into the ring one by one to face the giants from the city of Gath. The entire battle now hinges not on an army, but on the guts of one man.
So we see 3 champions face 3 giants. First, you have Sibbecai taking down Sippai. Then Elhanan steps up to fight Lami. And yeah, that's the brother of the Goliath. But the final duel, oh man, that was fought by David's own nephew, Jonathan, against a giant so bizarre he was a legend all by himself.
I mean, just try to picture what Elhanan was up against. He's facing Goliath's brother, who's wielding a spear with a shaft described as being like a weaver's rod. That's not a spear, that's basically a massive wooden beam. The sheer strength it would take to even lift that thing is unbelievable, which makes Elhanan's victory all the more incredible.
But all of this, it was just the warm-up act. The final showdown happens in Gath, the giant's own hometown. And this last giant was the most fearsome of them all, not just because of his size, but because of his strange and unnatural anatomy.
24. Just a number, right? But in this context, it represents something monstrous. Something that isn't quite right. Here's the breakdown. This giant had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. That's 24 digits total. And he stood out there in front of everyone, hurling insults at the army of Israel, daring anyone to face him. And just like the giants before him, he was put down, this time by David's nephew, Jonathan.
Okay, so let's take a step back. We have 2 completely different kinds of war stories sitting right next to each other. One is a clinical, step-by-step guide to crushing a city. The other is a series of mythic duels against monsters. So why tell them together? What's the connection here?
The whole chapter ends with this one powerful summary. These were descendants of Rapha and Gath, and they fell at the hands of David and his men. Did you catch that? It's not just about the individual heroes anymore. Every victory, every giant slain, it all gets rolled up and credited to David's leadership. It becomes his legacy.
And that's where the 2 stories become one. By blending this very real-sounding account of a siege with these larger-than-life tales of giant slaying, the narrative creates something bigger, a national identity. The message is pretty clear. Our kingdom is built on both smarts and strength. We're clever enough to conquer armies, and we're brave enough to face monsters.
And all of that leaves us with one last thing to think about. What really builds a more powerful legend? Is it the tangible proof of victory, like a 75-pound crown that you can actually see and weigh? Or is it the unforgettable story of a hero staring down a 24-fingered giant? The true genius of this story is that it knows you absolutely need both. You need the history and you need the myth.